We get started.
Okay,
Hello,
let's
everyone,
roll.
and welcome to our ClearPoint webinar. I'm your host, Ted Jackson, and today we have a good one. We're going to be looking at Origin Bank's approach to strategy, alignment, and data-driven decisions. I'm excited to tell you that today I have with me Regina McNeill. She's the Executive VP of Strategic Planning and Market Analytics at Origin Bank. But before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that this is a live webinar. You can submit questions directly down in the questions part of this Zoom meeting. We'll do our best to get to them throughout the webinar. A recording of this event will be on our website later today. So let's dive in. Welcome, Regina, and thanks for joining me on this webinar today. I was checking my notes, and Origin Bank has been using ClearPoint for almost 10 years, since 2016, which is 2 years before you became a publicly traded company. Tell me a little bit
Yes.
more about Origin Bank and your role there.
So I have been with Origin Bank for 29 years. In 2015, I sort of transitioned into more of the strategy side and have been primarily focused on that for these past years. I work with all of the market leaders, and each day's a new day.
Excellent. So you've been doing strategy for at least 10 years. Let's talk about the evolution at Origin Bank. Like, where did you start?
Absolutely. So in Origin Bank, we have really always thought of strategy as like a living document, and we wanted a platform that we could manage our strategy at a higher level of thinking, aligning vision and strategic planning. But we also needed a platform that would allow us to create collaboration and accountability. 10 years ago, we went with ClearPoint because we believed that software would deliver these things to us and then more. Our strategy is really anchored within the concept of exemplifying a culture that facilitates evolution. At that point, we took a step back and we thought we needed to reimagine what our strategy was, how we created strategic planning, how we went about just weaving strategic planning and what our plans were for that, that current year. We needed to have a platform that would allow us to, just mesh all those things together. We also felt that using pillars as the foundation for our strategic plan would allow consistency, but also give us the opportunity to pivot if we needed to, within our strategy during the year. So we felt like that this was going to set us up to be even more successful.
So for people that don't use pillars in their organization, why don't you tell me a little bit more about them? What are they? Like, how do you think about,
Sure,
what a pillar is? Is it a strategic objective or is it different?
it's really higher than that. It's more the strategic themes or the areas that we have to focus on year in, year out, day in, day out, that is going to make us continue to help us be successful as a financial organization. There are things that it doesn't matter what the economic landscape is. It doesn't matter, what the environment or the landscape is within your organization. There are still things that you're going to do that are going to set you up to be successful. And so that's what we used as the foundation or the sort of the concept whenever we were building these foundational pillars. So even though we have these, it still allows us to be, to be flexible. And if we need to change during the year, then it has set us up to do that.
Awesome. Can you share any of these pillars?
Yes, let me. Okay, you should be able to see.
Yes.
This just gives you a little bit of a timeline of, where we started. And as you're looking across these, you can see how, for the most part, they've remained pretty consistent. we've had some, we've refined some of them along the way. You can see in 2018, we had our IPO then, and originally our pillar was, being a high performing community bank. Well, when we became publicly traded, that became, a focus on corporate delivery. So that's kind of one example that, will show you how it's easy to adapt and adjust these, but still remaining true to who you are.
That's cool. So when you introduced them, like, how did you use them, and how did they, like, were your conversations involved, just in these 6 areas? I'm looking at the 2017 one. Like, how did it help you stay flexible?
So with this approach, we were able to move from a strategy that was more departmental and had a lot of tactical to-do lists into an idea mapping strategic plan that would help us to drive higher level thinking about our strategy, and also to be more forward thinking about our strategy. We also wanted our strategy to be much more data driven, and taking this concept and being able to build it in the ClearPoint, it also gave us the ability to connect these data driven points that we were looking for, and connect that with our strategy.
Cool. So when you said this cut across departments, so do all of the departments kind of use the same pillars?
Absolutely, we do. These are, like I said, these are our foundations. And as we open up the year, begin the year, and working on our strategic plan for that year, all executives have, they have a voice at the table. All of them are involved in what we identify as our objectives and our goals for those, for that particular year in these areas that we feel like we have to achieve in that year for us to continue to be successful in that area. But when you take the sum of all the parts, it really elevates what you're doing, and it really gives you the opportunity to dial in to what you need, but still have the capability to, if you need to adjust during the year. COVID was a perfect example of that. We started out 2020, but then very quickly we realized we had to pivot on a lot of things. We were still able, though, to maintain our foundational pillars that we had, because regardless of what was going on, these were still the things that we needed to accomplish at the end of the day. We just had to adjust our methods and our objectives and goals and how we were going to accomplish these.
Great. I mean, it's really just a great way to keep the organization aligned, and at least using the same, the pillars, but it's using the same language kind of across all departments as a way to motivate people on the things that are most important. So in our pre-discussions, you were telling me about kind of a second evolution of your strategy, kind of like a version 2 or an iteration 2. When did this happen? And tell me about some of the changes that you had.
So we really started reevaluating things, and starting in 2022, and then thinking 3 years. We don't necessarily do a completed 3-year plan. We focus on the year that we are in, but also take into consideration where we're going, where we're headed, what we know we will be looking at in the future. So we were able to, at that point, we were starting to layer in a lot of data and KPIs. By the time we got to the end of 2024, we had over 150 KPIs that were, layered throughout the plan. But we were spending too much time reviewing data and not really using that information to make decisions. we just had too many. It's what I called analysis paralysis. We spent too much time trying to peel back layers on things that were really, maybe they were not the things we needed to focus on to help move the needle. So towards the end of the second half of 2024, it was time for us to really have an honest assessment of what we desired Origin Bank to be over the coming years and really ensure long-term independence. We also took a hard look in the mirror and said, we have to move from average performance to really extraordinary financial performance if we were going to remain independent. That our organization has been built around focusing on our unique culture and heavily investing in our employees. And so that still had to remain a piece of this. We added another, just another piece to the puzzle, bringing in the elite financial performance.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when you look at the opportunity to measure more, like it's unlimited. Like every department, there are more measures you could put in. Data now, especially in the 2020s, the early 2020s, it just became more and more easily available. So it's really, it's not surprising to see you get so many measures, but it's really nice to hear you say, like, we took a step back and realized that these weren't providing the value that we needed. It was bogging us down. Like I don't want to say fun, right? But as interesting and capable as it is to get more measures, they don't necessarily provide that additional value for you.
Absolutely. In our organization, we depend on data to help us make better, more educated decisions. I think that also allows us to make quicker decisions and implement things faster. But as you were saying, you can put so many in there till you spend a lot of time looking at all of that and not really having your high level discussions that help you make decisions in your organization.
Right. Okay, so we got a few audience questions, and
Sure.
so I'll just feed them to you. And I know that we had discussed prior to starting the live webinar, is that since you're a publicly traded company, you weren't going to be sharing things inside of ClearPoint that you have. But this will be a question that I'll get you to maybe describe how your ClearPoint is set up. So the question is from Julie, and it says, do your pillars show up inside of ClearPoint? And can you tell us kind of how they're connected to things like objectives, initiatives, or actions and KPIs?
Absolutely. So those 7 pillars that we have, those are set up as our major goals within ClearPoint. And then within that, and I think maybe in ClearPoint terminology, maybe objectives. But within that, that's where we start building out more detailed information. We've got, here's what our major objectives are that we need to achieve for the year. Then we can also take those things and, dig a little deeper and then identify the high-level initiatives that we're going to need to achieve. It's all cascading and it rolls up. But one of the places that we stumbled early on is trying to build too much into it. We were getting so granular in building, task and action items and things within the software. And so that was another place where we kind of stepped back and reevaluated. And we really use ClearPoint as a tool to help us keep things organized, keep things aligned, allow our executives to have a say-so in it. So we did build out more granular pieces underneath our pillars, but we still kept them high level. We didn't really get into tasks and to do things like that. That's where we had come from. And we let ourselves slip back into that for, a small period of time. But then, we stepped back and said, okay, we changed what we were doing and we want our strategic plan to evolve. And so we said, all right, this is how we've got to realign and, just refocus on more of the high level things and less of the small detailed to do things. Does that help?
Yes, I think so. But that leads us to our next question, which is from April, which says, can you elaborate on what elite financial performance is and what your approach is? And I think this kind of takes us to kind of iteration 3 of your strategy that you've been alluding to.
It does. So as we entered into 2025, one of our driving focuses was to deliver elite financial performance, but also using that to enhance our award-winning culture. And it was what we termed as optimized origin. It wasn't really a project. It's not really a point in time. The evolution to optimized origin is really, it's a collective commitment from our leadership to not only invest in people and systems to create more data-driven insights, but we also aligned it with our decision-making process to drive sustainable high performance. And as we were building out 2025, we still stayed true to our 7 pillars, but then with the flexibility that ClearPoint allows us, we used that method and we dialed into what were the other areas that we had to focus on in our optimized origin. And through that, we created 3 primary pillars that were really able to incorporate these pieces throughout the 7 pillars of our overall corporate strategic plan. And I think I've got the screen up where you can see, there's our 2025 strategic plan pillars. But as we were focusing on optimized origin, we had to look at productivity, delivery, efficiencies, balance sheet optimization. That was going to be a critical point. We want to be a high performing and not an average performing bank. That's how we're going to stay to be, that's how we will remain an independent company. And so just taking a step back and looking at those 3 areas, I've got another screen that I can show you. So a lot of it was really about how do we move our ROA? There's, so many different things in our financials and our balance sheet, but at the end of the day, can we look at ROA as maybe incorporating all of those things? So that was one of the higher level financial pieces that we dialed into. And so it was really about focusing on these 3 areas of performance to help us create a more simpler message. And, at that point, we also recognized that we needed to reevaluate the vast number of KPIs that we had in our plan also.
So you're able to, by the way, for those that are not in the banking business, your ROA is your return on assets, right? Your overall, kind of one of the key measures of performance. And it's great to see, like yes, you still have the 7 big picture goals, but they can narrow down into a simpler message, right? And even on this screen, it's like these 3 items at the top: the productivity and efficiency, balance sheet optimization, and culture and employee engagement. How did your kind of meeting cadence change? Like, how did you talk about strategy? Did that become different in this high performance organization?
Absolutely. So moving up, like I said, moving into 2025, and this was this was going to become our focus. We also recognized that as a management team, we needed to change the way that we communicated as an executive team. We've always had monthly executive meetings where we talk about strategy and strategic plan, but we were not forcing ourselves to be more forward thinking. We continue to allow ourselves to talk more about, what we had been doing versus what we needed to do to make sure we get where we're wanting to go. So we renamed our monthly management meetings to what we call a Team One meeting in our organization. That is what we focus on. It's Team One. We have over 60 locations across 5 states in kind of the Southwest, or Southeast. But at the end of the day, it's all about the Team One aspect or philosophy. And yes, we need to be successful in our markets, and it all rolls up to being successful as an organization. So we really restructured our Team One meeting as we, were going into 2025, and we were using the data points to have discussions about, asking ourselves questions rather than just, looking at the data. One of the things we talked about was branch profitability, also banker profitability. How can we use those data points to help us make those decisions? So as we're asking ourselves these questions and, coming together as a management team to formulate solutions and answers for this, we had the data to help back up the decisions that we were going to make.
Yeah, so this is like it's you talked about it as a almost like a subtle change. So I'm going to make it less subtle to people listening. Is you went from kind of coming to meetings and reviewing all the data to coming to meetings with particular questions you're trying to solve or answer or push the company on in different ways, and then using that data to inform how you discuss those questions and how you ultimately make a decision. Am I hearing that right?
Yes. We also created a safe space in that meeting for healthy conversation. We needed to be very honest with ourselves, with one another, and sometimes hard conversations are necessary. But through the guidance of our CEO, we really had a safe space to have these conversations that would really help us move the hurdle. Don't let yourself get bogged down. Not wanting to talk about these really important things because they may be a little bit harder subject to talk about. When you talk about how do we move the ROA, we had to look at all of our markets, all of our locations. Those can be hard conversations within our management team, but we all knew that we were in a safe space. We also had expectations that as a management team, it was our responsibility, and there was an expectation on us for us to make these decisions and have these conversations.
Yeah, it's interesting. If I think back to the initial pillars that y'all rolled out, 8 or 9 years ago, there was one on, the value and importance of culture and employee engagement. That has stuck with you. It's now become one of the top 3 here. I hear it come out when you say it's Team One meeting, not, optimize the organization meeting. It's about the team you have there. And then hearing you say, like, we created this safe space. Well, like, yeah, if you're discussing, what to do about underperforming branches or bankers or whatnot, you have to have this safe space. And then the other thing I heard, just to kind of call it out, is like CEO leadership in this area, right? This isn't like HR saying we should be one team, culture is really important to us, executive team go off and have this meeting. It's CEO and the one team around the CEO, the full team is doing this. It might be called out one team in 2025, but it sounds like it's been one team for 10 years or more, or maybe the entire history of Origin Bank.
We've gotten better at it. We have gotten also a lot stronger as an executive management team. When we really started, when we adopted that philosophy of the team one, then I think that created a foundation for all of us to come together, but also knowing that we had a voice at the table. And you're right, it starts at the top. If your CEO is not bought into this, or is not, they're not comfortable with this, it's going to be an uphill battle for sure. So I think 100% of it starts with buy-in from the top. And our CEO recognized that as a high-performing organization, and the desire to be an even, we didn't want to be average. We wanted to be more high-performing on that. This was going to create that roadmap that we needed for that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're running out of time, and I still have a few more questions. One thing that I think is really important and interesting when you bring leadership teams together, especially to do what we push, and it's great to hear that you're doing it, is making decisions around the strategy. Like, do you have a decision-making process? Like, how do you think about, does everyone just argue down to the end, or tell me a little bit more about this process?
So within our organization, we have what we call a decision tree. It's that decision-making process. And if I am the executive that is wanting to, bring an idea to the table, it's my responsibility for me to do a lot of due diligence before I even bring it to the executive table for discussion. It may be creating pro formas. You've got to look at the impact that it may have on your customers. And so we actually have an evaluation sheet that we go through, and I think I actually have it shared on the screen. And we just look at several different aspects. What is the impact to customers? Do we have an impact to a culture? To our business as an overall business? And so we go through that process, and then it is presented to executive management. We have a period of time that people can ask questions, and then each executive has a vote on the things that are brought to the table through this decision tree process. It's been very, very successful for us.
Oh, awesome. I love decision trees, and I think it's important to just to have the transparency as to how decisions are made, so people know, like, oh, this document they came across, this is my time to give input. Like I know now, so I won't be complaining about a decision later. Okay, so
that's exactly right.
Yeah, so we're running out of time. You've discussed what I think is a pretty sophisticated approach to strategy that's changed over time, right? We're seeing decision trees, we've seen multiple iterations, seen this long-term consistent leadership. What kind of advice would you give to someone who's, where you were 10 years ago, maybe, and is just getting started with strategy? Like, it seems kind of intimidating, maybe, but how do you get started?
The first thing is, don't be afraid to break up with your current plan and process if it's not meeting your expectations. Even as our strategy has evolved over the years, we've still remained flexible and helpful in supporting, in these in the various iterations that we have. And it can be hard to get started. You just need to jump in. And if you don't like what your initial, decisions are, start over again, but just keep working at it and don't be afraid to make changes. That's how you get better, is to evaluate where you are and, take the steps to change things and get better. I think ClearPoint is a great platform that will help you stay focused on strategy. And, it has your data in it, so you're not having to track down data, updates, reports. ClearPoint is actually very useful throughout all stages of strategic planning. And I think that it has been the perfect platform for us to be able to remain flexible and really forward thinking.
Regina, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your time with us today and all these insights.
Absolutely.
I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for including me.
All right. Y'all have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.